Hello everybody, welcome back. It is what I watched in January. This month in particular, I watched a lot of classic movies towards the end of the month because I looked at my graph on what I've watched on Letterboxd, and honestly it is not good enough. I have not seen enough old films, so I'm going to make that my mission this year. And this month in particular, I went very Hitchcock. I think next month I'm going to go quite Kubrick. If you're not a big fan of movies, I feel like what I just said there's, just kind of gone over your head. It's probably pointless. So I'm just going to start talking about the movies I saw. Please remember to like the video if you enjoyed it. And, whatever you think of the video, comment it, please. And of course, if you could subscribe, that would be great. We're now close to 700 subscribers. We are inching our way towards 1,000. And yeah, if we can get 700, I don't know, by the end of the month, if that's possible. That's probably not possible. By the end of March, that would be pretty cool. So yeah, let's just get straight into the movies I watched this month. First off, we have Joker. I'll be honest, it was just on, so I watched it. It is still great. I still love it. It is still Taxi Driver but with face paint, but that's okay because it is, for my money, the second best performance of Joker, the character, of all time, and that is huge because, I actually really like Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and I feel that this was definitely better than that, but I still personally wouldn't put it ahead of Heath Ledger's performance. That's just my own personal opinion. I still love the movie. I think it's great. I think it's dark. Yeah, Joker. I feel like everything's already been said about that movie. It was a pretty big thing when it came out. Then I watched The Kingsman starring Ray Fiennes, which is a prequel to the other two Kingsman movies. I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy this as much as I thought I would. It didn't feel like a Kingsman movie except for the last half hour, I suppose. Up until that point, it wasn't as fun as the other Kingsman movies. It wasn't as funny as the other Kingsman movies, and the Rasputin character was a bit odd, wasn't he? Then I, after that, watched the original Kingsman, which is just so much better. It's so much funnier. It's so much more fun. It's way more lighthearted. It's way more emotional. It's way more iconic. Taron Egerton will always be the face of Kingsman for me. Colin Firth is great in that movie. Yeah, the original Kingsman is so superior to the new one. Then I watched LA Confidential, one of my favorite ever movies, starring, Kevin Spacey, Guy Pearce, and Russell Crowe as three very different police officers, all kind of negotiating this one case very differently at first. They all do it in their own way. The rabbit hole just gets deeper. It becomes this big conspiracy, and I'm going to leave it at that for the synopsis. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies ever because, as I've said many a time, I love detective noir movies. I love private investigator movies. And let's be real, I'm a big fan of Russell Crowe. I'm a big fan of Guy Pearce. And as an actor, I'm a big fan of Kevin Spacey. So yeah, I love this movie. It's amazing. I love LA Confidential. It's chef's kiss. I then watched Twilight. I watched 4 of the 5 Twilight movies this month because I will be doing a video on them. So I'm only going to briefly touch them here because, I want to really talk about them in their own separate video. I watched the Twilight movies with my girlfriend because she loves them. And, spoiler alert, I don't. The first one, all I'll say is it is horrendously shot. It is such an ugly movie. It's so blue. And I'm so glad they don't do that for the rest of the movies. The rest of them are visually watchable. Like, you can actually look at them. Entertainment-wise, we'll get to that. And, like, the writing and the acting and all that. We'll get to that in its own separate video. But this one is so blue for some reason. And it just looks shit. I then watched the 355 with Jessica Chastain, Lupita Nyong'o, Diane Kruger, Penelope Cruz, and some other one, because apparently there's 5 members of the 355, and that last one is literally in it for the last 10 seconds of the movie, and I don't know what her name is, and I probably never will, because this movie was one of the most unoriginal movies I've seen in a long time. If you've ever seen an action movie or a spy movie, you've already seen the 355. I can't think of a single original thing this movie did. The only reason I've given it a 2 is because at least it looks like a movie. Like Twilight, the first one, doesn't even look like a movie. It looks like a fucking film school project. It's so terribly color graded. But yeah, 355, one of the most unoriginal, boring movies I've seen come out recently. I then watched Twilight New Moon, which is the werewolf one. Although as a movie from like first act to third, it's definitely worse than the first one. At least it looks like a movie. So I think I gave them I think they both got a 1.5. And the reason I'm not giving them a 0.5 is there is stuff there. And sure, that's probably just down to the source material, and like that shouldn't be accredited to the actual movies, but there is something there that I can understand why people would be obsessed with Twilight. And I suppose at least when this one came out, they fixed the biggest issue with the first movie, in my opinion, which is the color grading. But I feel like this movie's last act is just so bad. It's just so bad, and it's so much worse than the first movie's last act. So yeah, Twilight really off to a good start. From there, I watched The Raid, starring Iko Uwais. Sorry if I know one of those two is how you say the first name, and I'm really sorry. He's great in these movies as an action star. Sure, the acting in the first one isn't anything to write home about because, you know, there's not an awful lot of dialogue in said movie, but the action is incredible. Like that scene where he fights the 4 guys with machetes in the hallway is just incredible. It's one of the best action scenes I've ever seen. And then the fight scene where the protagonist and his brother fight Mad Dog, who is so fucking cool, is just such an amazing scene. It is so well choreographed, it is so well executed, and they do this thing, bear with me with this one, where you see the actor doing the action, the stunts, the fight scene, you see his face in it all, so you actually buy into it. It's not like a lot of Hollywood action movies, like fuck me, the 355 was so guilty of this, where all the action, you just see the back of the actor's head because it's obviously a stunt double and the actor can't do any real action except for like maybe a hop, a skip and a jump. But in The Raid, these guys are all just incredible stuntmen, martial artists, whatever it is that made these movies so good. Like it does stem from the fact that you can physically see these actors performing these stunts, and it's just so gritty and gruesome and amazing. I then watched the next Twilight movie, and it's somehow worse than the previous two. These movies, spoiler alert, just got worse for me. They got increasingly worse. Then after that, I watched 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is an incredible movie. Frances McDormand is so iconic in this movie. She is so good in this. Sam Rockwell is so good in this. And Woody Harrelson is class in this. This movie is just amazing. I recommend it so hardly if you haven't seen it. This was actually the first time I'd ever seen the movie. It is so fucking good. I'll give you a brief synopsis. This woman puts these 3 billboards outside her town because her daughter was like savagely murdered and raped, and they never found the killer, and they just kind of gave up. So she doesn't understand why they've given up, so she's doing all she can to promote the fact that the local police aren't trying to solve her daughter's murder. Yeah, this movie sets that up in like the first, scene, the first couple of scenes anyway, and then from there the characters in this movie are all amazing. It's such a good movie. I then watched The Silver Linings Playbook, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Bradley Cooper. I love this movie. It was really good. It is a really fun take, but a really well written and grounded take on the rom-com, because both of the characters in this movie, both of the main characters, and Robert De Niro's character, who's Bradley Cooper's dad in the movie, suffer from different mental health issues. Yeah, it's a very original way of taking on the rom-com. I love this movie. It was really good. It's really well written. It's so well written. I really like Silver Linings Playbook. And then after that, I watched Sicario, which isn't what I thought it was going to be. I was expecting a big, like, cinematic action blockbuster, like it's Denis Villeneuve directing it, so I knew it was going to look great, but I thought it was going to be a great looking action movie. It's a great looking thriller, actually, where Emily Blunt is basically taken to Mexico, and I don't want to spoil anything, but basically some somewhat corrupt US soldiers and agents are trying to bust this massive Mexican cartel, and they need Emily Blunt to do so. I then watched Fatal Deviation, which is Ireland's greatest, worst and only kung fu movie. I did a video on it. I really like the video I made on it, so go watch that, please. Fatal Deviation is iconic. I then watched the next Twilight movie, and I'll give you a little bit more on this one, because this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. The CGI baby is hilarious, and the ending is... oh god, I hated it. Ugh. No, even thinking about it is vile. The ending, I hate this movie. I hate Breaking Dawn Part 1. I then watched The Tragedy of Macbeth, directed by Joel Cohen. It's Macbeth. It's a very, very true to the original take on Macbeth. It stars Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand, and because it's an A24 movie, it is in 4:3, it is in black and white, and it's got really, 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 really cool set design. This is, probably the best version of Macbeth I've ever seen in film. And, if you like Macbeth, definitely watch this. If you like Shakespeare, definitely watch this. If you're studying Macbeth in school, or, if you're just giving Macbeth a read, I don't know if people do that in their own spare time, give this movie a watch. It's a very, very accurate, true to the original, fairly true to the original take on Macbeth. Denzel Washington is class as Macbeth, by the way. He is a very good Macbeth. I then watched The Raid Part 2. Now, if you prefer the Raid, that is so fine. The Raid itself, the original, is much more action based. It's very much all about the action, whereas The Raid 2 tries to go a little bit deeper. It's a very worthy sequel. It tries to expand on the Raid cinematic universe, even though I think there is only going to be 2 of them. I don't think there's a third one coming. This movie is The Raid meets Goodfellas, and I love it. I love that they did that. I love the multiple gangs trying to vie for power in whichever city in Indonesia this is. I actually don't know what city in Indonesia it's set in. I love this movie. I do prefer it to the original. I think it is maybe just a tad long, but I do think I think it earns its runtime, because sure, when my dad came in and watched some of it with me, he just said, oh, so they're just going to stand around and talk for a bit, and then big action sequence, and then they're just going to stand around and talk for a bit. And yes, that is what's going to happen, but I like that. I really enjoyed this movie. I think that again, sorry for the pronunciation, Iko Uwais' performance in this one's better than the original, because he's got straight away the opening scene to this movie is a huge surprise. It's a massive surprise, and that kind of sets up a really complex plot, believe it or not. The Raid 2 has a very complex but also easy to follow plot. There's a lot going on in there compared to the first one, and I actually don't want to spoil any of it, because I feel like if I even give a synopsis of this movie, it's a spoiler. If you like the first one and you haven't seen the second one, go in and watch this. And if you're like, oh, I've never seen the first Raid movie, but I like gangster movies, just watch the first one. It's not a long movie at all, and then watch this one. You won't be disappointed. I then watched A Quiet Place Part 2. Is this better than the first one? No. Did I enjoy this? Yes. I also thought Cillian Murphy's character was a very worthy addition to the A Quiet Place movies. I really like him in this movie. I think the child performances, yet again, from the 2 eldest children are exceptional. I just didn't particularly like from the second half of the second act till the third act when it had 10 minutes to go. That little chunk there kind of just didn't feel right. I feel like if this movie was a bit longer, they should have really fleshed that bit out of the movie, because we get introduced to all these new ideas and concepts that weren't in the original movie that are really cool. I like all of the ideas in this movie that are brought to the table. I just feel the execution wasn't as good as it could have been, because I do think this movie could easily be like an extra 20 minutes if it wants to be, and it would be completely earned, because the actual ideas there are great. But then I did really enjoy the last 10 minutes of the movie, as well as, the first act and a half. Then I started watching all those classic movies I told you about. If I did include, I don't know if I used that take for the intro actually, so maybe I didn't tell you about those. But yeah, I watched Rope, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And Jimmy Stewart is amazing in this movie. It is such an easy watch, and it's such a daring concept that in 1948 Hitchcock tried to make a movie that seemed like it was all one take. That is crazy ballsy. And sure, a lot of the last couple of cuts, actually, so the first part of the movie is all one take, and then when Jimmy Stewart's character comes in, we do get the odd cut to Jimmy Stewart's character, but for the most part it's meant to look like one big continuous take. And a lot of the things that they do to try and make it one continuous take is just, we're going to get the camera, we're going to zoom it in on someone's back, and we're going to zoom it back out again. And obviously it's a really obvious cut to a new scene, but like at the time, that is some revolutionary shit. That is so impressive that he even attempted it, and I think it looks great. I think this is one of Hitchcock's most underrated movies. I really like Rope. It's such an easy watch. It flies by. Jimmy Stewart is the old college lecturer of the two men who in the opening scene have murdered their friend. And in order to create this, they really wanted to create a perfect alibi. They wanted to commit the perfect murder. So what they did was they then had a dinner party with the body still in the house, because no one would believe, that they killed someone, kept him in the house, and then had this big dinner party, and then, they were going to chuck him out after the dinner party. But that was what they were going to do to cover their tracks, because they wanted, John Dahl's character really wants to commit the perfect murder. He's really built up as this really cocky, egotistical, the world's all about him, just evil soul. Whereas Farley Granger, who plays the other murderer, and by the way, they are so obviously a couple, and I that's one of the things I know a lot of people love about this movie. Farley Granger's character, he is just bricking it. He is so just ready for this party to be over. He is so nervous because he is convinced they're going to get caught. And that dynamic is great between them two. And then you throw in Jimmy Stewart, who's just fucking class, and you've got yourself a great movie. This movie is so short as well. It's like less than 90 minutes. So absolutely, if you're in the mood for some really, really suspenseful stuff, and you're into watching older movies, definitely give Rope a go. It is so quick. It is such an easy watch. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. This movie is pretty damn great. It's got John Wayne in it, it's got Jimmy Stewart in it, and it's got Lee Marvin in it. Lee Marvin is one of the coolest voices I've ever heard. That man has a cool fucking voice. This is a movie about Jimmy Stewart, who is a well-educated accountant who gets, highway robbed, I guess, by Lee Marvin and his gang, and he's stuck in the Wild West, is Jimmy Stewart, where, if you want someone to go to jail, well, that's not going to happen, so you're just going to have to shoot them. Because that's how it went in the Wild West. And Jimmy Stewart kind of has to try and come to terms with the fact that he is very much stuck in the Wild West, and there's no such thing as law, or they can't even read in the Wild West, but he tries to teach them, which is quite nice. It's actually a really nice subplot. I love this movie. It's great. Jimmy Stewart, once again, is great. Love Jimmy Stewart. Then I watched Scream 2022. This movie, right, let's get into it. This movie, I've heard a lot of people say, is not as fun as the first Scream movies. I would disagree. I think David Arquette in particular just makes this movie fun. I love David Arquette in this movie. I love Dewey, the character, anyway, and I think he really does add to this movie. He is, as they call him, the legacy character. Yes, Courtney Cox and Neve Campbell are in this movie, as is Billy Loomis, who, you know, his inclusion in this movie I'm a huge fan of. Like, I love how they included him in this movie. And yeah, I think this is a very worthy sequel. Sure, it's not the best movie ever made. Sure, I do think they were a bit too repetitive with some of their jokes. Like, they were constantly fucking talking about elevated horror. Like, cool, that's a great thing to talk about, but there is so many other things you can also talk about other than elevated horror. Like, as Chris Stuckman said, the fact that Hollywood is too scared to make comedy horror movies anymore. So, like, that's easily something you could talk about. Instead, they just kept banging on about the same elevated horror jokes and the same requel jokes, because it's not a sequel, it's not a reboot, it's both. They kept banging on about them jokes over and over again. The first times they were funny, the second times they were funny, the third times it's like, come on, there's so much more stuff you could talk about here. The murderer in this movie, or murderers, or whatever it is, because, you know, we're not allowed to spoil Scream movies, whether it was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 murderers, or 7 possibly. I guessed correct who it was, and I'm pretty proud of myself, although apparently it was quite obvious, but I thought I did good to predict it. My girlfriend can vouch me there. I got it right, and I don't normally get those things right. I normally guess the wrong person in murder mysteries. This was a bit of a murder mystery take. It was a bit more serious than the originals, sure, but I do think David Arquette made this movie fun. I then watched Vertigo. Guess who's in this one? Jimmy Stewart, because I love Jimmy Stewart. That guy is a great guy, and he's also a great actor. Vertigo is really, really good. Hitchcock just gives us this interesting ending, I'll give you that. That was the one thing that I couldn't wrap my head around the first time, but I do appreciate the ending. It's a shock, but then Hitchcock was always known for his shock endings and his suspense, and obviously, although everyone said it, the actual way that Hitchcock makes the vertigo, like Jimmy Stewart, who has vertigo's perspective, come onto the screen is just ingenious. It is so clever, and also that dream sequence is fucking awesome. Then after that, I watched Breakfast at Tiffanys. This movie, okay, I have a gripe with this movie, because this movie is so fucking timeless. It is such a modern couple in this movie. Audrey Hepburn is so effortlessly cool, and George Peppard is a really, really likable guy in this movie. And it's such a modern take on romance. It is not a take from 1961. It is like a 2022 kind of take on a couple, because, you know, Audrey Hepburn is so fucking cool in this movie, which is kind of mad, because apparently she was actually a bit of an introvert, and apparently she kind of struggled at first with this role because her character is so extroverted. But oh my fucking god, that Mr. Yunioshi character is one of the most racist, just sad things I've ever seen. I don't even think at the time it was funny. Like, I did a bit of reading afterwards just to see if, like, that was actually cool at the time, and like, apparently even then they were like, yo, what the fuck. Basically, Mr. Yunioshi is a very Asian stereotype with these massive buck teeth and like these tiny prosthetic, you know, sad fucking attempt at an Asian but he's played by a white guy. That's where I'm going with this, and it's so bad. It's so blatantly racist, and at no point is it ever funny. It's such a shame. Like, if this just wasn't in the movie, this would be such a perfect movie. Like, so timeless and perfect. And just this one character who won't fuck off. He just keeps showing up. Just ruins every scene he's in. It's such a shame. It's so dated, but I feel like it was even dated then. It is such a shame, and I know everyone has an issue with Mr. Yunioshi, and everyone says, he ruins Breakfast at Tiffany's, but fuck me, does he ruin it. Like, my god, what a I hate Mr. Yunioshi so much. He just ruins it. He ruins it. I then watched The Dead Poet Society. This movie is perfect. So I will go into it. So I love the Dead Poets Society. I personally, just for me, this movie really, really, really speaks to me. I know that's a cringe thing to say, but you know, you go through your life and sometimes you just watch a movie and you're like, wow, it feels like this movie was made for me. And that's how I feel about the Dead Poets Society. I love this movie with all my heart. It is amazing. Robin Williams is amazing. Oh my god, it's a fucking crier though. My god, you cry in this movie. Ethan Hawke is so good in his child performance. We can't not talk about Robert Sean Leonard in this movie. He's so good. I love this movie so much. This is just such a fucking beautiful, poignant, well written, well acted, heartfelt movie that I just love. I just love this movie. Now, finally, I have two more movies. I watched Rear Window, which is a slow burner, but in a good way, because holy shit is the ending to this movie. Tense. Jimmy Stewart. Yes, I watched another Jimmy Stewart movie. Plays a man who's had his leg broken. He's a photographer. And, by the way, one of the most incredible opening scenes. It gets so much done in such few time. Like, this establishing opening scene is so economical. It just does everything it could possibly do in one scene. Hitchcock, you know how to make movies, so you do. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but Jimmy Stewart plays a guy who's he's got a broken leg, and he's in his cast for he's got a few more weeks left in his cast, so he's just sitting there at his window, and his window faces off onto this whole apartment complex, and everyone, well, most people just seem to constantly have their windows open and their lights on. So, you know, he's bored. It's the 1950s. I think this was in 58. Could be wrong though. And Jimmy Stewart, you know, he's just a bit of a people watcher. He's just watching all his neighbors go about their business. And then all of a sudden he thinks he's witnessed a murder. Now, whether or not he has witnessed a murder, I will not tell you. You can figure that one out for yourself when you go watch the movie. But this movie is amazing. Hitchcock is, you know, he's a damn good director, so he is. Jimmy Stewart plays a lovable prick. He is an asshole in this movie to Grace Kelly, who is also good, but he is an asshole at first anyway. He has a bit of an arc, so he does. He's just kind of set himself for this whole movie. He's just dedicated himself to figuring out whether or not his neighbor has in fact murdered his wife. And yeah, this movie is brilliant. And the final movie I watched was North by Northwest, which is the first ever Bond movie. Fight me. James Bond, for a lot of his movies, copied off North by Northwest. Hitchcock just gave us a brilliant spy thriller, an accidental spy thriller. Cary Grant is so fucking charming in this movie. He's got a cool voice too. Actually, it's not his voice, it's his accent that's cool. Lee Marvin's just got a cool voice. But yeah, I love this movie. I think the ending is quite disappointing, to be honest, but I think the humor in this movie is great. It's a very funny movie, and obviously the cornfield scene is always going to be iconic. And yeah, North by Northwest is just a great older spy thriller. And yeah, I can't stress, Cary Grant is so fucking charming in this movie, my god. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I have my next couple of videos planned, so don't worry, there'll still be plenty of uploads coming. I will be replying to anybody who comments in the comments section, so you know, if you've stuck around this long, please, it would mean a lot if you could comment on the video, because that really helps the video get a bit of exposure, because you know, we are trying to grow the channel. We're trying to get a nice little community going here, and obviously I just want to hit 1,000 subscribers, because that little K next to the one is pretty cool. I don't like it just being numbers. I want there to be letters and numbers with my subscriber count. Yeah, thank you very much for watching, and let's be real, I'll probably see you next week, so see you then.